Hi, I'm here today at Quilters Connection to show you a great new product that we've just come out with. It's the Featherweight Special Edition of the Ideal Seam Guide and Ideal Seam Gauge. We'll show you how this thing works and how it'll help you improve your sewing and the accuracy of your blocks. The system includes two parts, the Ideal Seam Gauge and the Seam Guide. The way this works is the Ideal Seam Gauge has a series of holes along the bottom marked with the seam allowance that you're trying to get. The seam allowances range from 1/8 of an inch up to 1.5 inches, including a scant quarter. To use the guide, lift the needle and lift the presser bar. Place the seam gauge underneath the needle and lower the needle into the hole that represents the seam that you want, just like that. Then you rotate the seam gauge into the direction you're going to sew, drop the presser foot, then you take the seam guide, remove the cover off the rubber strip on the back, you place it up against the seam gauge like this and press it into position. Once you have it in position, you then lift the presser foot, lift the needle, remove the gauge, and you've got a seam guide that you can sew against and feed your fabric against through the needle. With the seam guide on the machine, you feed your fabric through and it acts as a fence or a stop for your fabric so that you get exactly the seam that you want. The seam guide adheres to your machine using a strip of engineered rubber on the back of it that's very, very thin. It's so thin that the fabric won't run underneath the gauge on your machine. And when you remove it, it will not harm the finish on your featherweight sewing machine. To use the guide, just hold the fabric next to the guide and feed it in. Like so. You get a great consistent 1/4 inch seam. To remove the guide, simply slip the end of your fingers underneath the beveled side of the guide, pull up, and it'll pull right off the machine bed. Another great feature of the Featherweight Special Edition of the Ideal Seam Guide is that on the back side there is a cutout here, and that is for those of you who sew with a walking foot. When you put the guide on your machine with a walking foot, you simply position it where as you need it. There's plenty of room there to sew with the walking foot and use it to get your seam allowance. In addition to working really great, it also looks fantastic too. You can see that the decals and graphics on it match the decals, the gold decals on the Singer Featherweight sewing machines. The Featherweight Limited Edition Ideal Seam Guide is available at Quilters Connection here in our store or online at www.quilters-connection.com.